Reality with crime prevention is sometimes we have to actually do things beforehand to actually prevent the crime. It's easier to put the fire out in the beginning before it even starts than it is to try to actually put out a full-blown fire. Yo, what's up, family? Welcome back to Building the Block podcast, where the conversation is real, relevant, and restorative. Listen, we want to jump right in because what I want to do is I want to paint a real picture of my why. I think that sometimes we talk about our whys and we give a story, and what I want to do is I want to tell you a story about my life. Why education is so important, why physical health is so important, why mental health is so important. We just have to really dig in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right in. When we think about our communities, and black and brown communities is what I'm talking about specifically. When you think about these communities, what are some of the things that come to your mind when you think about really creating change in these communities? Do you think about crime prevention? Well, the reality with crime prevention is sometimes we have to actually do things beforehand to actually prevent the crime. It's easier to put the fire out in the beginning before it even starts than it is to try to actually put out a full-blown fire. And so a lot of times we put money into our prisons. We put money into making the prison system better, even though it's not getting any better. But we put more time and money and energy in as a society for what happens after you commit the crime than we do to actually prevent the crime. And so when I think about my youth, one thing I think about is that we have to practice mentorship. You're going to hear me say that all the time, but when it comes to our youth, we are just going to have to invest in our youth. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my life story to show you how in each season of my life, if I had a mentor, I might have made different decisions. So you might be asking, what exactly is a mentor? Of course, many people have different definitions of mentorship, but I want to read you something from a really solid organization called Mentor. You can go in there, their website is called mentor.org. I'll leave it in the comment section below. But listen to what this is saying. Mentoring it's ensuring that young people have at least one consistent, trusting adult in their lives to help them navigate daily changes, make positive decisions, feel cared for, and know that someone is cheering them on. Research shows that mentoring is one of the biggest protective factors in positive youth development, reducing risk of negative self-esteem, poor academics, and risky behaviors. Ultimately, mentoring works because it gives young people the opportunity to grow and thrive under the guidance of an intentional adult-to-youth relationship. Some of you watching this right now are like, man, I've either played that role, I've been that to somebody, or I know somebody who needs that. What we need to do is to really dig into this, because you can be a mentor in any phase of a child's life. You just have to be intentional. But listen, here's a little bit about my story. I want to tell you about my time in elementary school because, well, that's pretty much where everybody starts school. Somewhere in elementary school, maybe daycare, right? It just depends on the family. So I think in daycare, I might actually got into a little bit of trouble in daycare. I can't fully remember the story, but pretty sure something happened in daycare with me. But for me, what I do remember is in elementary school. In elementary school, there was a few things that I remember most. And it's not really about what happened in school. It was about what was happening in my home life. Much of my life was, I would say, chaotic. There was this chaos that was consistently happening in my home life that affected me in my school life. I never was the type of kid who really necessarily enjoyed reading or school in general. And I remember being in second grade, and we had ran out a bunch of teachers in second grade, but I remember one substitute teacher. I can't think of her name right now. If you find her, watch this one day, you're like, yeah, I remember that kid. Like, I'm super sorry, but we had this one substitute, and so she was with our classroom for about half a day, and then I think somehow she went to the bathroom and we went and we locked her in the bathroom, and she never came back. And so that's just a little bit of my second grade life. In second grade, I stayed back. I believe twice in elementary school in second grade. Somebody's sitting there like, man, how do you fail second grade? That right there is the problem, right? How did I fail second grade? Well, behavior issues. Those were the biggest things. I was also expelled once, actually, in elementary school. I brought a double blade knife to school. That's a whole nother conversation. But the reality is as you can see now, my primary school years, they started off rough. The thing is that in these seasons in elementary, there was not one person that was actually taking real concern about me as a real person, as a real kid. They only looked at the behavior. They only looked at what was on the outside. That right there is a major flaw. But see, that was elementary school, but let's look at middle school, right? Some people call this your adolescent ages. Just depends on who you're talking to. So look, middle school, a lot more happened in middle school. From my neighborhood, if you grew up in the hood, you know that there's a certain phase in life where you basically, you jump off the porch, you step off the porch. And 12 years old, that's around the time when I basically started to hang out with guys around the neighborhood, started to get in trouble in the neighborhood. But 12 years old was also the age where I started to smoke and drink. Yep, I said it. I was super young. Didn't know much, but all I did know is that there was a lot of, again, the chaos that was in my life. It was a lot of hurt. It was a lot of pain. I was already the biggest dude in sixth grade because I had stayed back twice, but they moved me up one grade because I was the biggest kid in class. But all that to say is I was multiple years behind. I was not caught up because I just wasn't doing good from an academic standpoint in school. I also didn't have enough, I would say, caring adults in my life outside of the people who might have been in my family. I think sometimes we think, oh yeah, you got family's enough. But there are really a lot of times when kids, like how I used to be, they will prefer to talk to somebody else other than their parents. So that's something to really think about, parents. If you're watching this there, it's like, yo, get your kids a mentor. It doesn't matter if you're in a two-parent household, like I was. So yeah, middle school, smoking, drinking, barely doing any work in class. I don't think I was suspended a lot, but I definitely was typically in a lot of trouble. I remember my dad used to work at a men's homeless shelter, so he had access to these the little cups for urine to do a drug test. And I would get a phone call home saying, I was smoking weed. And I remember like just being terrified and thinking to myself like, man, I have a couple days to try to clean out my system. And I tried my best drinking, the water, cranberry mix. Anyways, so look, middle school again, we can see that from elementary school to middle school, I am way behind. Not just 2 years behind because I stayed back. I am behind academically. I'm behind in math. I'm just behind in general. But I kept getting pushed along. Around this time, No Child Left Behind was around, and I'm consistently being pushed along when I shouldn't have been. But middle school was also a year that I developed a passion for music. I was a different kid. I didn't really care much about sports. I played a bunch of sports, and I'm athletically inclined to be able to be good at them, but it was just something that didn't really fascinate me. And when we're coming up in school, if you don't play sports, you are somewhat of an outcast. I think sometimes we got to think about that. If you play sports, you get a lot of attention. But when you don't play sports, a lot of our youth just don't get the right type of attention. If a kid is into music, like at that time when I'm growing up, we didn't have all these music programs and things of that nature. We did have go-go. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so we had go-go, so I knew the music. But we'll get into a little bit of that later in a few. So, high school, right? High school was, I would say, a beginning of a decline for me. In high school, ninth grade, I was never in class. I was almost suspended most of my ninth grade year, but I've still been in school. So I spent all my days in school, suspended, just in school, running from principals, running from security, and just, doing my own thing. Never went to class. It got to the point where fourth quarter, like the last quarter, where you're like, man, I got to get at least a D to graduate. When you start going to class, when it came to fourth quarter, I remember I didn't even know where my classrooms were. I had no clue what class I was supposed to be in or anything. One of the other worst things that happened to me is that in one of my math class, it was trigonometry. I got a B in trigonometry, but the problem is that we literally just took people's papers from the front of the classroom, passed them around the back classroom, so I cheated my whole way. And I was in trigonometry, and that messed me up for getting that B. Self-image, didn't really have any idea of who I was, who I wanted to be. I only had one image. That was the image of the streets. Like, the street life captivated me from the age of 12. It was the only thing that really fascinated me. And it showed even more in high school. It showed more as I got older. So in high school, I actually failed gym. That's the one class most kids don't fail, right? But I did. But look, I was also introduced to go-go. I started playing for my first band, High Quality. Shout out to any of y'all listening to that. That was my first band. And that was like a family to me. Still are. I still keep in contact with some of them guys today. But I got introduced to go-go, and I started really actually finding a place where I felt like I belonged. I was a musician, played the keyboard, still do, but I actually finally had a place where I belonged. And if you think about youth today, that's a question that they're asking too. Like, where do I belong? So started playing that, but then go-go led into what an addiction for me. It led me to abuse alcohol. It led me to abuse smoking and all these different vices. And so again, this is high school. By the time I was 16 years old, I was drinking almost every day. I wasn't focused in school, couldn't focus in school. Ended up at another smaller school. And that was the first time I actually encountered what I would consider mentorship. Got into the school called William E. Dorr, no longer a school. But there I met one of my music teachers. His name was Mr. Hamlin. If you listening to that, right? I really appreciated the guy because he was the only person that really, I would say, actually saw me. And again, he was a musician. I was a musician. He was one of the first people in my career or in my life that actually saw me. He taught me how to play instruments. He taught me so much about life in general. And I don't even know if he would go back and be like, oh yeah, I was his mentor or nothing like that. I was just a music teacher. It's probably what he would say if you talked to him. But it was an important relationship in my life. And both when I look back at middle school and high school, elementary, if I had a caring adult in my life, I would have made a lot more. I would have made better decisions. Let me just say it like that. I would have done things a lot differently in my life. When I met him, by the time I was in college, I started to do things just a little bit differently. I started to go and do some gigs with him. But I actually started to take music more serious. I stopped trying to do the street life. That's a whole nother story that we can get into maybe in another episode. But stopped doing some of the things I did on the street. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to shift my attention to do other things. But by that time, college was just, I barely made it through college. It was a good thing I did make it out of high school, but when I got to college, I spent 4 years at UDC on my parents' money and did absolutely nothing. I partied. I failed algebra 3 times because remember, in 9th grade, I got a B in trigonometry. Still don't even really know what that is, but I dropped out 3 times college. So look, man, there was like really no consistency in my academic journey. I didn't see any value in learning. I didn't see any value in reading. I remember having to do book reports every single year, and I wrote the same book report every year for Harry Potter books. I never read a Harry Potter book a day in my life. Funny story, one day I think my dad put $20 in a Harry Potter book, told me to read it. Never read it. I think he found it maybe a few years later. Same place, same page. Yeah, my loss, right? So look, one of the things that contributed to that is that I think I just didn't know my own history. I didn't know who I was as a black male in America. I didn't know what my people fought for in order for me to have and to be able to receive an education. That is where I would say the biggest problem is with a lot of our young youth in America. They don't have the opportunity to see themselves as being successful all the time, because up until recently there has been a disparity in our school systems where, one, we are lacking black teachers, we're lacking black male teachers at that. So we have very little black educators in school spaces. We have even less black male educators for our young men to actually look up and to see. And so we got to do better with that. And when we think about mentorship, I look at many communities like Ward 7, Ward 8, where I live at in Washington, D.C. A lot of the mentorship programs, they attract, I would say, a lot of white males. And so very seldom do you see thriving organizations that are locked in with like a predominantly black staff. And I think that anybody can be a mentor, but I do believe very strongly that representation does matter, and we have to push for that. I think when we look at our history, you see a lot of great black and brown men and women who literally do excellent. They fought for education, not just for themselves, but they fought for education for generations and generations and generations. And if I knew my real history, if I knew the real depths of what it meant for me to be black in America, what it meant for me to pursue my education in America, what it means for me right now to be pursuing a PhD, what that means when I go out into the streets and talk to young males and show them that someone who dropped out of college 3 times, somebody who barely made it out of high school, somebody who only got out of middle school only because of No Child Left Behind, and because of my behavior, they didn't really want me to back. And somebody who got kicked out of second grade or elementary school twice. I think that we have to really do better with sharing these stories. And so that is connected to my why. And if I had a mentor all throughout these time periods, I truly believe that myself and a lot of other young males, young females, that they can actually live a life that is more holistic, that is more healthier. But we have to do the work of actually going to these communities and investing in the youth. So why do we need mentors? That is the question that we have been working through. And I want to read a little bit more of what research is saying as to why. This is some pretty recent research. And here's what it's saying. It's saying young adults who face opportunity gaps but have a mentor are 55% more likely to be enrolled in college than those who do not have a mentor. In addition to better school attendance and better chances of going on to higher educations, mentor youth maintain better attitudes towards school, But remember my own story. My attitude towards school, it wasn't there. But had I had a mentor, this research, I think, would have definitely been shown more visible in my life. But look, 46% less likely than their peers to start using illegal drugs and 27% less likely to start drinking. Remember, and I got that one from a study done from the Big Brothers and Big Sisters organization. And what you think about, I started at the age of 12. But I would have been 45% less likely and 25% to start illegal drugs and 27% less likely to start drinking had I had a mentor in elementary school, had I had a mentor in middle school. And the last one is mentors promote positive social attitudes and relationships. Mentor youth tend to trust their parents more and communicate better. So parents, I started in the very beginning. I said, yo, even if you're a two-parent household, make sure your youth have a mentor in their lives, have somebody else that they can talk to. Because I think about my life and many of the young people that I mentor. I remember one student having a conversation, and she's like, man, I'm getting in trouble. My parents aren't listening to me and all that. And I'm having to just actually slow it down. Like, hey, have you just tried to talk to them? After the weekend, she comes back. It's like, yeah, we had that conversation and it went good. Like, they realized that they went a little overboard or whatnot. And of course, I'm paraphrasing the conversation, but all that to say is that I've mentored many young people who this statement, this what's found in research is also empirical data. It's lived experiences as well. So look, I'm not going to say all this without giving application. I do believe in application, what I want to see happen. So application, here's what we need to do. So the first point of application, how do we apply this to our lives? The first thing is to see youth for who they can become. When I see a young person, I don't see their behaviors. I don't see their actions. I don't see their faults. I see who that young man, who that young woman can be. And I ask young people at every age level, what do you want to be when you grow up? And how do you get there? If you just start listening to those conversations and listening to the thought process of young people, you realize that they're just young people trying to figure out life. They're mentally, physically, cognitively, they're not fully developed human beings as of yet. So it is a flaw in adults to believe that a young person, an adolescent, a child will be fully developed enough to process life in a mature manner, because some adults don't even do that. So that's the first thing. I want you to see youth for who they can become, not what they do, not the sabotaging behaviors that they can present. The second thing, your actions and words matter. What you say, what you do matters. When I was in high school, I didn't share this, but when I was in high school, an assistant principal, he looked me in my eyes and told me by the time I turned 16, I would be dead or in jail. He said that I would most likely not make it to live to see the age of 18. And he literally said that if I make it to see 21, that I will be either strung out, on drugs, or in jail. Everything that he said stripped my self-awareness, my self-identity, my self-esteem. It took it away. That's the power of words. That's the power of what an adult can have on a child. Often we see this so much in our societies and our communities. We consistently talk down on our young people. We see families that have broken structures and kids get cursed out. I've heard kids get cursed out while they get out the car, and I've heard parents call their kids stupid and dumb and all kinds of stuff. Well, they believe these things. They believe these things, and it affects their academics. It affects the way that they process information. It affects the way that they learn. We have to do better. We have to teach better. We just have to work on those things. So your actions and your words matter. Also, be someone of integrity. Be someone who these young people can count on. Many of the young men I work with, many of these young men have, I would say, abandonment issues. We had took a group of guys out, and we were like, yo, what's a healthy example of manhood? Most of them said they could only name the 3 men who were out with them, myself and 2 other guys. That's all they had to say, is these were the examples of malehood that I had in my life. And most of them were in high school, 10th grade, 11th grade. You got to do better. So that's the second one, is your actions and words matter. And the third one is invest instead of complain. You go throughout social media, and depending on who you talk to, everybody's trying to blame this person. Oh, it's the parents' fault, it's all kinds of stuff like that. And my thing is, how much are you investing in our youth? How much are you investing in their future? How much are you pouring into your nieces and your nephews and your cousins and your children? How much are you investing into the next generation? It's real easy to complain. It's real easy to just be upset. But the real work, the real change in our communities is when we get up off our butts, when we get up out of our comfortability and go invest in some of these young people and go listen to some of their stories. Because honestly speaking, the stuff I hear people say about young people in today's generation, it's just ignorance. It's ignorance and it's willful blindness. Because half the times we don't even know these young people's stories. If you know anything about the crack epidemic in the 80s, that literally dismantled many different households. Many. And so you have a lot of young men who have grown up 3-4 generations of fatherlessness. But yet, we don't see that as the problem. We talk about systemic racism, and we don't really dig into how it has affected our youth. So we have to do so much better of really being empathetic and sympathetic. So, what are you going to do today? That is my charge to you. What are you going to do today? How are you going to apply these truths today? I want you to drop it in the comments below. Give me some ways that you have been applying these things. Also, don't forget, if you have any questions, leave them and I will get to them as I can. Let them be episodes, whatever it may be. Make sure you like, you comment, you subscribe, you do all of those good things. And just rock with me. And let's build up our communities one brick at a time.